And we're live. We are live. Welcome to everybody watching live on the Llama and those of you watching after the fact on YouTube. This is the Green Bay City Council non-partisan debates, hosted by community advocate Rhonda Sitnikow and Pastor Jerry Bader of Samaritan's Art Ministries, and this is District 9.
Thanks, Jason. Again, welcome to the Green Bay City Council Nonpartisan Candidate Forum debate. We have District 9. We have an incumbent with us, Brian Johnson, and challenger Tarl Knight. And this discussion will be featuring 9 questions that were vetted through the Facebook group, as well as Jerry and I collaborated on a few ourselves. The parameters for today, the guidelines for today's debate will be: you will each begin with an opening statement. We will have questions where you will be able to answer for 2 minutes. And then after that, you will each have a 30-second rebuttal opportunity, finishing finally with a closing statement. And we did this last time. Yeah, as far as deciding who's going to start, I don't know if we want to just no the fingers.
For real, I'll do it this way. All right. How many fingers do I have behind my back? Brian, okay, you first.
We've got 5 behind your back in total. Do you mean how many are you held?
Yes. All right. He answered the first correct question of this debate. I do have in fact 4 fingers and 1 thumb. How many of those fingers are now extended?
2, 3, 4.
So there you go, Brian.
All right.
So Brian can begin with his opening statement.
Yeah, first off, I want to thank both Pastor Bader as well as Ms. Sitnikow, Rhonda, and Jerry for facilitating this, and of course the Greater Green Bay Society of the Llama. I mean, this is a really good thing for our community. I've often times talked about democracy working best and functioning best when seats are contested. And so on that note, I would also like to thank my opponent, Tarl Knight, for being here. We know that not all of these seats, not all candidates were willing to show up, and I think that's unfortunate. And so I'm very pleased and happy to see my opponent here willing to talk about issues that affect our city. Personally, for me, I am my history. I've worked a lot of different jobs throughout my life as a construction worker. I've worked on a farm. I've worked in the hospitality business for many years. I've also been a small business owner and currently the executive director of a nonprofit organization. So I bring a lot of different perspectives and years of experience that helps influence the way that we shape policy here in the city of Green Bay. When I first ran, I think the thing that really triggered me was when we lost the Bullfrog Stadium. And so I ran on that issue. Of course, many at the time, but that one is what really prompted me to want to put my name on the ballot. And since then, we've approved $10 million for the shipyard, another $1 million for neighborhood enhancements. We've started working on the relocation of the coal piles. That's been a huge priority. Roads, of course, has been a big issue. And so we've made some progress on that front, which I'm sure will be a question that comes up later. But most importantly, I think it's about how you serve the residents in your district. And we have a very large district that, I mean, like every city district here, that serves about 9,000 residents. It stretches all the way from Badger State Brewing and Georgia Pacific down to Copper State Brewing, and now, of course, over to the east side of the river. And that is a very diverse district with different needs in different neighborhoods and different areas. And so I've spent a lot of time in all of these areas, really getting to know and understand our neighbors and what's most important to them. And as a result, we've really been able to shape a lot of policy, I think, that helps them in different ways. But more than anything, I wanted to bring effective leadership to our community. Talk a lot about honesty, integrity, accountability, ethical behavior. I think those are all very important things to any representative on our city council. And I feel like stability has come a long way. That wasn't always the case. And we're able to critically talk about issues and have differences. But more importantly, we work together and compromise. We work together on solutions, and that hasn't always been the case. And I think Green Bay's a better place because of it.
Well, I also want to thank everyone for being here, and thanks for the opportunity, Rob and Jerry. And I got the invitation from Jason, Jerry, and so thanks so much for having me a part of this, and thanks, Brian, as well. Thanks for your leadership over the last couple of years, and everything that you've done up until this point. And I want to talk a little bit about myself and just introduce myself to folks who maybe don't know or aren't familiar. My name is Tarl Knight. I live here in District 9. Right now, this is taking place at Gather, which is just a couple blocks from both my business, the Tarl Theater, which I co-own, and also my home, right by the city deck on the east side, and just a few blocks from an area that we're calling the Shipyard District. And over the last year, I've been fortunate to work with a lot of different business owners, a lot of neighbors of mine who came to me and said, maybe there's an opportunity here for us to revitalize our area. And what does that look like? So over the last year, I've been a part of this journey with over 50 businesses and many, many residents. I was unanimously appointed as director of a nonprofit, which is led by a number of independent, local, small businesses, a lot of bars, restaurants, and manufacturing industrial businesses that exist along South Broadway. And we'd like to come together and form a Shipyard District. In that process, I've learned a lot about the city and a lot about revitalization. We haven't seen a lot of the changes that we'd like to make, but that's a very large platform for me, and an issue, I think, to a lot of folks in this area. That Shipyard District area extends in between 1/4 and 1/3 of District 9, so it's a very big section of this district, and there are a lot of folks down there that want to see a lot of the benefits that other areas of our city see, and other areas of District 9 see, like the Broadway District and the Downtown District. So that's kind of my introduction into the local politics of District 9. I've been out there knocking doors, and I've been meeting a lot of folks trying to understand the diversity of this district. We have an Astor Park neighborhood, and then we have a neighborhood like the one that exists down in the Shipyard District. So there is a lot of disparity of income. There's a lot of different resources that aren't necessarily available to everyone in the same ways. And so providing that equity is a big challenge, but that's something that I want to be able to take on. I'm a low-income person, but my heart is here in District 9, and I want everyone to have the same opportunity. And so I appreciate the opportunity here to talk a little bit about that more. And just in closing, I want to say thanks again for the opportunity to have this debate and this conversation, because I think that Brian and I really do want a lot of the same things. We want to develop, and we want people to be able to have a nice standard of living downtown.
All right, let's begin with the first question. How important is the perception or even reality of crime when it comes to the quality of life in a neighborhood? What can you tell your constituents that you are committed to doing when it comes to reducing gun and drug-related crime?
So, Rhonda, in your question, you made a very important distinction, and that is how important is perception versus reality. And the one thing that I've consistently been trying to communicate is that Green Bay is a very safe community, especially when you compare us to other similar types of communities out there. Our property crime is down, our violent crime over the last, from 2019 to 2021 is down. However, there is a recent surge, particularly in violent crime, that we've seen since the beginning of this year, and most notably, the number of shots fired incidents. And so I've oftentimes talked about that it is not enough to be safe in your community, you have to feel safe in your community. And when you don't feel safe, because one single issue takes over the narrative, you have to get in front of that issue. And in this one in particular, shots fired incidents, we've gone from an average of about 14 to 18 shots fired incidents per year to last year, I believe the number was 78. It was around 80, somewhere in that. And of course, we're trending in that direction again this year. So there are a number of things that we've done. ARPA allocation funding has been very important. $2 million we've allocated to provide support to our police department. We have 192 officers that are funded, but only 178 are filled because it's incredibly difficult to recruit officers right now. So we have to invest resources into getting properly trained, experienced officers into our police force. We have to work on a neighborhood response team, which is a new initiative that has come out, where we're really getting boots on the ground and into the neighborhoods and understanding what their needs are and how we can address it. But more importantly, we can't be afraid to talk about the issue. And right now, it is a very important issue that's affecting our neighborhoods. And I've been out front by having our police chief come talk to our committee to give us a full explanation of what's happening. I coordinated a listening session where we brought all of our neighbors in, brought in the police department, and talked about the issue. So I think that there's a lot that can be done and that we are doing. I look forward to coming up with additional solutions this year.
Tarl?
Gosh, I've lived down here for a number of years and own a business for just as many, and I've been a victim of violent crime right here in this district, unfortunately, which was a very scary thing for me. And so what I kind of bring to the conversation is that element and that perspective that it can creep up and sneak up on you, no matter what you're doing and no matter who you are. I think that my take is a little bit of the sociological one, which is that crime happens from a disparity in resources. I mean, if you study crime and you study people and communities, that's where it comes from. So how do we provide those resources to people who need them, and people who are really yearning and reaching for a new opportunity or a better place, a station, and so providing a lot of the things that we're going to do anyway with development, with allocating dollars to a lot of these, communities that are in need. When we're looking at development, we want to afford people affordable housing developments, and we want to make sure that there are places people can live, so that houselessness isn't a factor, and people aren't stringently, disconnected from the people around them, so they have a community and a neighborhood full of people that they can reach out to with resources. And in addition to that, when we're looking at a lot of the violent crime with guns, we're working with the police force is certainly, a staple of most, tactics with handling a lot of violent crime. But there are other communities nearby who are using other resources available, like social worker and advocates who will go into the community and deal with problems like this that can't always be rounded out with a badge or a gun. And there are a lot of different elements here that we should be able to look at other communities and say, let's borrow a little bit more intelligent option, and let's test some of those out. We have the budget to do it, and so let's do it compassionately.
Yes. 30-second rebuttal, Ryan.
Yeah, I would take the rebuttal opportunity to maybe reinforce a few points, and one is, I think we have to trust the police to do the job that they're required to do, and give them the resources that they need to do it properly. And of course, one of the things that I did support was we have some social workers on our police department. I think that's been a really important piece, but it's also recognizing, as an example, a proposal that's come before us to purchase a gunfire detection system that was $700,000, probably another ongoing $210,000 expense. So it's recognizing, is that the best way to achieve an outcome? Or can you look at applying those resources in a way that gets at the systemic needs within our community? And so that's just an example of something that, as members of City Council, that we really have to analyze.
Tarl?
Yeah, I really appreciate what Brian's talking about with the systemic issues, and I think that those things need to be tackled. There are a lot of instances of gunfire, and a lot of it can be confused with fireworks in our neighborhood, so, there might be more or less than what I'm thinking there is, but I think that a lot of the data will show that these things aren't necessarily impacting people, or these aren't guns that are being shot and hurting other individuals. So, the resources being poured into detecting gunshots, maybe that's important, but I really would like to amplify the amount of social work that's being done in the community, the amount of outreach. I think that those are the things that are going to impact people's lives. You can do after-the-fact research and analytics, but getting out there in the community, being proactive and making sure people have the resources they need is the angle I like to take.
Next question, and I'm going to indulge a bit and make this a bit more personal than what I've asked you previously. As Alderman Johnson knows, our church resides in District 9. And when I was a know-it-all talk show host, I had all the answers to homelessness. And then I became a pastor, and I have a church, and homelessness has become a focal point of our ministry. It is not uncommon for people to be sleeping behind our building, and painful that we can't help them. I had a homeless man walk in last week. It's not the first time. Repeatedly do what we can. So it is with that backdrop, and we have a relationship with St. John's Homeless Shelter. There is a considerable number of individuals in our community staying in shelters who experience homelessness. That doesn't include people who live in their cars, storage units, basement to basement, couch to couch. Has the city done enough to support these individuals? How can you as a council member work to improve the situation?
We'll take the lead on this one.
Well, once again, here, this is an issue that I know pretty intimately from the perspective of someone who's been houseless. When I was a figure there who was couch to couch or living out of cars as a young person, I think a lot of this goes back to disparity of resources, obviously. And there are other factors like mental health that certainly play an issue. This is a pretty touchy subject, and the way that I like to communicate with people about it is that we don't have, the problem rather isn't that there is houseless people, or isn't the houseless people, it's that we have houselessness. That I think people are afraid to touch this issue and communicate clearly about it and have open conversations, because there's not the sort of dignity that people would like to see, and that can be uncomfortable to talk about. But there certainly are a higher concentration of people who are houseless or homeless in District 9 than any other district. I've seen the figure anywhere between 2,000 and 3,000 people in the community who are homeless. And so some of the ways that we can handle this moving forward with development in District 9, which is just about to be teeming with all sorts of development, is creating affordable options. There's the Ashland Avenue Viaduct area. I would love to see the city purchase that area. I've seen it discussed on this stage in the last couple of weeks. The idea of tiny home village, or the idea of tiny homes that are affordable and small, but are able to get people back on their feet and able to kind of regroup and re-facilitate their lives. And I think that would be a good option, something affordable. There are a lot of different municipalities that will jump into this issue, and I know right now the county, Brown County, provides most of the resources for people who are homeless and houseless, but the city of Green Bay can certainly pitch in a little bit more than we have been. And I know that finding people opportunities to work and finding people mental health solutions is a big issue that Green Bay can help with. Again, the social working aspect of it, in order to really communicate with people what their needs are on a one-by-one basis. I think that's what we need to be doing here.
Right?
Yeah, I think it's important to distinguish the difference between affordable housing and homelessness. Right now, in the city of Green Bay, the city is disproportionately owning the responsibility for solving the homelessness problem within our community. The county has the ability, I think, to play a much larger role here. It's important to recognize that the county is the one that owns our health department, our Health and Human Services Department, and a number of the programs that are really required to help address this issue. And as a result, the city of Green Bay is carrying that burden for homelessness issues in every place around us. Just talk to folks that run these shelters, that run these facilities, and they'll tell you that. Right now in the city of Green Bay, we have approximately 50 to 70 individuals who are chronically homeless, And so the city of Green Bay has stuck millions of dollars into this issue. And of course, with ARPA funding, CARES Act relief funding, a number of that has come in, and we've invested that in other organizations. You think about New Community Shelters, St. John's, Freedom House, House of Hope. There are so many organizations in our community, including yours, Pastor Bader, that work on this issue. And so, we need to figure out how to, this strategy of sort of getting down where you're meeting individuals in their space and understanding what their true needs are so that you can solve those 50 to 70 problems. Throwing more money at a challenge doesn't always fix it. And I think, of course, if there's money that we can invest that will be leveraged in a way that can help us get to a better solution, of course I'm supportive of that. But we have to recognize that there are so many more partners at the table, and that's why I'm a huge advocate for the work that the Greater Green Bay Community Foundation United Way are doing to address this issue, because their role and responsibility is to bring all partners to the table and not just one being the city of Green Bay, because as I've mentioned, we are disproportionately owning the expenses involved with this, and I think that there's a smarter strategy that we can deploy to solve this problem.
30 seconds for follow-up.
The city of Green Bay sure is the center of Brown County, and so we're going to have a disproportionate amount of responsibility And we're going to need to give more resources than other areas. People are always attracted to the center of a metropolitan area, and with that. But I don't see it as a burden. I see it as an opportunity. We want to really use this opportunity where people are conglomerated into the center of the city to help these folks. And so I accept that responsibility as Alderman, and I'd love to talk with you anyway and Brown County and a number of the other partners and see what they're doing. But I think that the city can always be doing a little bit more. And why not? Because we care about these people. These people pay taxes. These people vote, and these are our neighbors. Right?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that every decision has a reaction. And right now, we are collectively creating a number of service-based organizations with physical presence within our downtown area, and that can oftentimes be a deterrent to other things that are required within our community. You know, when you talk about safe economic development and growing the tax base and of course supporting small businesses in our area. So creating solutions for those people, of course, very critical, very important, but you have to find a way to spread it out and not concentrate it in one area.
Next question. This is a two-part question, and I can repeat it if necessary. Do you believe the oversight of city elections as it exists is adequate? If you don't, what would you change? Also, would you allow a third-party entity to be involved in the election process again?
My first time, yeah. Well, I'll answer the second one, and I think the answer to that is no. I don't think that we ought to entertain support from third-party entities. I think if there are resources that are necessary to faithfully execute an election, we ought to be able to allocate those without outside interference. So do I think the city of Green Bay is doing enough? I think in the last couple of elections, there were some decisions that were made that I don't know that I supported. But I want to be very clear, because I've said this in multiple forums. Unequivocally, I do not believe there was any malfeasance that occurred with these elections. I do think that partisan politics is finding a way to inject itself into this issue on both sides, quite frankly. And I think that there's a way for us to detach and separate from that, and we need to. Our job is to execute elections. That's it, right? Whatever the state tells us to do, the federal government tells us to do, we have to be prepared to execute elections. And if there are challenges and problems that are being created through that, City Council's job is to pass policy and allocate resources in a way that allows local government to be able to perform that basic responsibility. And of course, I think some things are, because there's the partisan interference right now in what we're doing, I think some issues are probably being overblown a little bit, just because it's about keeping that discussion topic alive. But I believe the city of Green Bay right now, is doing everything that it can through the ad hoc. Am I on wrap it up yet? Sorry. With the ad hoc committee that that the council created, we involved members of council and the public and the community to come in and help us shape some basic responses to the way that earlier elections were handled, so that we can be better at what we're doing. So from a policy perspective, I think we're responding appropriately to the concerns being expressed by the community.
Well, Rhonda, I might need you to repeat the first part, would you?
No problem. Do you believe the oversight of city elections as it exists is adequate? If not, what would you change? Also, would you allow a third-party entity to be involved in the election process again?
Thanks for repeating that.
No problem.
As someone who really takes evidence, as the primary sort of basis for forming an opinion, when there was claim of interference or any sort of malfeasance, I think we'd all love to see the evidence in order to move forward on that conversation. And as of yet, I haven't seen it. And I'm not sure if it's been brought forward. If it has, then I'm sorry for my ignorance. But, I have a pretty good faith in the elections that are run here at the local level. And I have faith in our city hall and city administration to be able to do that. I do disagree with some ways that it was handled, or some of the avenues by which the election was held. I disagree with 2 election sites rather than a number of dozens. And I think that the election results in 2020 would have looked a lot different had people had many different avenues by which to vote. Unfortunately, that's the way that ended up happening. And, but I celebrate fair and free local elections. I participated as a poll worker, and I certainly wouldn't do that if I felt like the process was rigged or was somehow unfair, because I would want to be a part of that system, or I'd want to change it. As far as a third party, I don't think that that's necessary. I don't think that that's fair. I think that city administration does a fine job, and I hope everyone here can agree that the city administration, I mean, they're working very, very hard, and we're in a very tough situation. But if there's evidence of some wrongdoing, then I think that we'd all love to see that with these claims. Just to briefly touch on Brian's mention of the bipartisan or the partisan sort of affliction onto the election. If there is evidence for claims, then I think we'd all love to see it. But when we're talking about the state or the federal elections that aren't necessarily impacting the local elections, I think that there's going to be evidence to show for those claims. I think Brian is a pretty upright individual here in the community, very focused on local politics, very focused on local issues. Never seen any claims about any sort of federal beliefs of his. So that's my comment on that, Brian.
Rebuttal.
Yeah, and again, I would go back to, it's important for us to differentiate the difference between sort of the national hyper-politicized rhetoric that you're seeing versus what responsibility we have at the local level. And so I go back again to, I did support to accept the grant money. That was unanimous from City Council. But I did ask questions at the time about what assurances the community would have that our efforts would be purely nonpartisan and focused on our needs and not a partisan attempt to control an outcome of the election. So I think we're asking the right questions, and right now I think we're doing all that we can to continue to move forward.
Rebuttal.
30 seconds comes fast.
I don't think that disqualifies a rebuttal, but I certainly celebrate democracy and our city and their work with our elections. We all want to have elections that are safe and free and equitable for everybody. There's a lot that can be done at the state and federal level, but we're not here to discuss that. We're here to discuss the elections with the city of Green Bay, and I think that we've done an outstanding job. I really applaud the people at City Hall for their work, and I think that we continue this way forward, making sure that we're keeping an eye on things, and obviously we want to hold people accountable, but we need evidence for those sorts of claims, and I certainly wouldn't entertain anything without that.
All right, next question. The issue of affordable housing was mentioned briefly during the homelessness question. What is the city's role of establishing affordable housing? Are you concerned about the price tag of rentals in the city of Green Bay?
Yeah, I am concerned about rental prices in the city. If you go out there and you knock on doors all day long for weeks and weeks, you're going to hear a lot of folks who are worried that they won't be able to make their payments and can't live in a city. We want to make a downtown and an inner city area that's accessible to people of all income levels. And that means higher income, but it also means very low income. There are folks down in District 9, particularly south of Mason Street, who I've talked to very recently who work 2 jobs and can't make their rent payments or just making it. There are a lot of other living expenses. It's not on the city of Green Bay necessarily to facilitate everybody living, on its own. And that's not a burden that one municipality can carry. There's a lot of individual responsibility there too. But in this kind of post-capitalistic society that we're in, that's a very hard challenge for a lot of folks. So here's what I would propose: more affordable housing, new creative, fun types of housing that can exist, that are colorful, that exist very well and are placed well with other parts of the communities and neighborhoods, but maybe something more creative and edgy, like a tiny house neighborhood. This sort of attraction not only incentivizes new growth and new ideas in the community, but it allows for people to live on the sort of budget that a lot of us are on. And it is sad that we're talking about a tiny home situation where many people live in very large, sort of McMansion type of fortresses, but you know, we want to be able to use the leverage that we have at the city when we're inviting developers into District 9 and across the city to say, hey, look, why don't we serve and why don't we look at attracting other types of folks, diverse folks, people who maybe don't have all of the means to the downtown into District 9, because they deserve to experience the city of Green Bay as well. As a low-income person, I'd like to see a lot more of that done. I'd like to see some subsidized housing, and I'd like for the city to step in a little bit sometimes where it's necessary, and allow for all sorts of folks to come down and experience all the great business and culture that we have down here in District 9. And I'd support that on the city council.
Right?
I think the first thing you have to address is basic supply and demand. And so the city commissioned a study, a very comprehensive residential housing study that really helped identify what our needs were over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And really what that study produced is that the city of Green Bay needs thousands of units to help meet the demand that exists in our community in the coming years. And so the second part of that conversation is, okay, great, how, if particularly, let me back up. So thousands of units across all income levels. So I think a lot of times there's a strong focus on, of course, affordable housing, but the reality is we need them across all income levels. And so you can't be completely narrowly focused on one type when everything is needed. And so, but when you do look at affordable housing, it becomes a financial discussion. And how do you close the funding gap on those types of developments? I've been very supportive of Habitat for Humanity and NeighborWorks that do a lot of, obviously, single-family homes, but that's not enough to serve a crisis that's thousands of units deep. And so you have to look at large-scale development. Things like the Ford at the Rail Yard, Broadway Lofts, Impact 7, that are looking to add hundreds of units. Predominantly, these are funded through state tax credits. You have a non-competitive pool and you have a competitive pool that have different varying degrees of subsidy that are involved for the tenants that live in those units. So we have to get more aggressive with trying to find, folks will go through that, but if locally we want to dictate more of what's happening there, we have to find pools of resources that can help do that. One that we did was the ARPA funds. We allocated $6 million towards affordable housing and small business support. Another that I worked with our previous development director on is what's called the TDA fund, Tax Increment District Affordable Housing, and that is a very rarely used portion of our state legislative code that I worked with our development director to pass several $1 million of subsidy in that area to help support affordable housing in our community. So I think there are some things we can do locally, but definitely we need more state support if we're going to get the subsidy that's appropriate to build affordable housing. Is my time up?
God, Brian's right. There's so much development on its way in District 9. You know, hundreds and hundreds of units over the next year, 2, 3. As open, I'd love to keep that trend up. And I'd like to make sure that a lot of those are subsidized. And we continue to look into some of those budget options, funding options, because not only do we want to see a very dense, walkable, bikeable district with a lot of folks living down here, you know, which is the kind of downtown environment that everyone loves to go and visit, and is the kind of experience that people have in college, and that's what they want to go back to. But you know, making sure that there are affordable options so that people of all incomes can come and exist down here. I think that's a priority as these developments start to roll in over the next number of years and decades. I want to make sure that we're continuing to set a trend and a precedent for making sure that low-income people can exist there.
Brian?
There are equally strong benefits to supporting market rate housing development as well. It's referred to as the cascade effect. And essentially what you're seeing is individuals who have the ability to pay market rate are occupying housing that historically has been occupied by low-income families and individuals. And so to create more market rate housing allows those folks to move up, free up some of our low-income housing. And again, we refer to that as this cascade effect because it's just kind of flowing downward right now. We got to get it to flow back in the other direction.
Next question, what has been done or should be done to address areas in the city that are prone to flooding?
It's
It's a great question because District 9 has been subject to a number of areas that have experienced chronic flooding for many, many years, if not decades. It was one of the primary issues I uncovered when I first ran 4 years ago. And so there are a couple of things that we've done since then. One is at the site of the shipyard, that was something that I had worked on with our Public Works Director. We installed a $2 million lift station that alleviated a lot of the flooding that was occurring along Ashland and Broadway, Maple, Chestnut. And in fact, that lift station has 10 times the capacity of the one that was there previously. And it does pull water from a big chunk of the west side of Green Bay. Additionally, we installed a secondary lift station right near where White Dog is located, and that has a big tank under the ground. And so that again creates a holding area and a lift station that's meant to kind of suck water up and out. Additionally, I worked with our Public Works Department to secure funding for a pump. Streets near Shawano Avenue, Antoinette were frequently flooding, and so, but that's a little bit different because that ground sits lower. So the pump is meant to have a flange that prevents the river water from backing up, and then the pump takes it over the top of the flange and back into the river. So slightly different need there. And then finally, something that we're working on right now, we just authorized funding for half of it, but is to convert portions of Seymour Park into a stormwater retention pond as well as a greenway. So that way, again, big chunks of the west side, but water flows in there. It's going to be a two-part project that's also going to include the reconstruction of a number of streets in that area, which is obviously desperately needed as well. It really hurts to see the loss of parts of our park. But we've been very engaged with our neighborhood association and the neighbors that live in that area to make sure that we're minimizing that impact, but highlighting the most important features of the park that do get used by the neighborhood, while at the same time addressing a problem that has obviously been a very chronic need in that area where we've had to come up with a solution, and we finally have the city at the table doing that.
Well, I just want to preface my response by I'm not a civil engineer. And I'm not saying that this answer isn't fair, or this question isn't a fair question to ask, because I know that there is public infrastructure that's involved in this job, but I do want to preface. I think that there are a lot of needs that exist all throughout the district here. So let me talk about my experience as someone who's been knocking doors. I think that there are certainly a lot of conversations that can continue, particularly with the lower income parts of this district. Are their needs being met? There's already so much damage to property, and for folks who are owning their homes or maybe have an entry-level property that they just started owning or are just starting a family, those kind of expenses occurring on the watch of the city with flooding, those aren't acceptable. So what we have to do is we really have to take a look at are all the voices being heard throughout the district? Are the needs being met there? I love that there are conversations that Brian's been part of here with Seymour Park and disguising different civil engineering projects and public infrastructure solutions into the greenery and into the scenery of our city, making sure that we can have a functioning city, but those tools are there, but they really meld well with the environment. I'd certainly be dedicated to making sure that there are funds and that there are resources there that are happening at the city level in order to make sure that no one has that sort of property damage, that people can live in District 9 along the river, where I think that this is probably a pretty disproportionate area where flooding can happen, or at least there's a fear. No one wants to feel that in their neighborhood. There are a lot of global and national issues with flooding and weather and climate, and there is a climate crisis. That's certainly not something we can tackle here at the city level, but making sure that we are being environmentally conscious, making sure that we're taking a look at using these resources to prepare not only for the future, but also taking care of issues that exist now. But looking down the road, there's certainly a lot of brainstorming that's going to have to happen, and I would make sure that leadership comes here.
Thank you. Rebuttal.
Yeah, something that I did my first year when I was elected to council is I submitted a communication for the Public Works Department to provide a report to City Council of the areas within our city that most chronically flood and what it would take to solve those problems. And I believe there were 9 drain basins that were identified in that report all across the city. with a price tag of $150 million. We are an old city with old infrastructure, and it is going to be very pricey to ultimately come up with solutions to all of these needs, but I think the fact that we're here today talking about it obviously strengthens the opportunity for us to continue to fund this into the future.
I just wanted to point out, Brian mentioned it earlier, at the shipyard site, there is a pretty fun-looking pump there, and I think it's meant to disguise itself among what hopefully in the future will be a number of shipping containers, or at least I think that was the original plan. I think that there is an opportunity here in order to look far into the future. Brian is right on the head here with this is an old city with old infrastructure. I've got property with drainage issues. I've got neighbors who have those sorts of issues. Not only helping them, but looking far out in the future to make sure that we can set ourselves up anew here on our budget. That's something that I'd like to be able to handle.
Next question. We all too well know the reality of inflation in recent months. It's a national issue, but with local implications. Considering the reality of that inflation, how will you approach the next city budget with taxpayers and inflation in mind?
Well, I'm also a small business owner, and what that means is that product costs and service costs are going up. The inflation is certainly an issue that escapes none of us. We see gas prices rising. Now, maybe that has to do with inflation, maybe not, but there are a lot of rising costs, and something that at my business we've really tried to do, Mark and I, is we've tried very hard to keep the cost of our services and our products that we're selling pretty low, and as a result, our markup is a lot smaller. But we're still trying to provide those things at an affordable level to the people of the neighborhood. Now, on the city level, I know that this is going to impact, all of the certain services that the city is going to be providing to people across, across the community. What I think I'd like to do is make sure that we're looking at other funded resources, other sources of dollars, pulling these in so that we're going to be set up for the future. Obviously, there are progressive and liberal and conservative angles to fiscal responsibility, especially in a city like this, which I think could use a larger budget and will in the future when there's a larger tax base with more development. So pushing that forward, making sure that we have a larger tax base is not only responsible but essential. But back to the first point, I think that we have an opportunity here to really dig deep into this budget. We should be auditing at every opportunity that we have. There is some wasteful spending, I'm sure, and so cutting those things now, not to jump ship, but there are certainly a lot of opportunities that we have going forward in order to trim the fat and make sure that right after the pandemic and in a time of inflation across the country, and especially here in Middle America, now's the time to take care of those things. Decals on city vehicles is that an essential expense, during this time. And that's just an example. That's not my whole page, but I'd love to bring some fiscal responsibility to this area while making sure that everyone has the resources that they need, and so that's going to take.
Brian?
Yeah, I'm going to go on a limb here, and I'm going to say that I don't think what's happening with inflation is really going to impact the City of Green Bay budget that much. And here's why. You have to understand how city finances work. And a couple of things. One is the biggest chunk of our budget is based on personnel. Most of our personnel costs are under contract. And so you're not going to see substantial increases there. Now there is a caveat, and that is unrepresented city staff. And so of course, we budget for those types of increases. Am I going to wrap it up already?
This is first response.
Sorry. It's like, whew. The unrepresented staff is something we're likely going to have to address. When you start looking at other variable expenses, you think of things like fuel costs, for example, those are under contract as well. We have a bulk purchase agreement that extends for several years under that. And so those rates are already set, and as a result, inflation shouldn't impact that too much. How we fund a lot of our projects is actually through bonding. right? Big capital projects, big capital purchases, all happen through bonding. And while the bond interest rate will likely go up, so far the feds have only increased that by a 1/4 percentage point. They've indicated that they'll do some progressive increases likely, but it's a very small, is an overall reflective, very small increase of the overall reflective needs of our community. But what you will likely see is that contracts that come back, bidding contracts that come back for reconstruction of roads, repaving of roads, new storm water laterals, things of that nature, the price of that will go up. So ultimately what will happen is that we'll be able to do less than what we've done with the same dollar before, but that doesn't necessarily have to translate into a substantial tax increase. In fact, I think just the opposite is what taxpayers ought to expect, because it's what the city's capable of doing to make sure that our residents aren't further harmed by inflationary increases that they're experiencing in their everyday life.
Now we're about.
All right, here's my 30 seconds. I think Brian's right. I think that there is a need to take a look at, is now the time to continue to increase taxes? No one wants that, right? No one wants to be taxed, out their eyes and ears. But for a long, long time, I think the city has been holding back on tax raising. Or implementing different financial instruments where we can continue to obtain a larger budget in order to take up kind of the ball for all these new services and a lot of people who are coming into the city. Is inflation an issue at the local level? Maybe a longer conversation is needed there, but fiscal responsibility, that's neither liberal nor conservative, but that's just responsible. Allocating the things that we need to the people who need them. That's the kind of leadership that I'd like to bring in. And unfortunately, that's a very long conversation. But here's the best answer I have.
Brian?
Yeah, I think when you look back 3 years ago, 2 years ago, we saw substantial tax increases. I guess my position is the city's already inflated their tax rate to a point where we ought to be able to buffer taxpayers from further tax rate hikes this coming year, particularly again recognizing that our everyday consumer spending is being so dramatically impacted by needs, things like groceries and other basic needs, that we need to find a way to restrain further tax hikes so that way more of that money can be in the taxpayer's pocket.
Next question. Do you believe your race has been impacted by partisanship? And can you give pros or cons as far as that, what you believe about that reality?
Yeah, it certainly has. Now that said, I would say not nearly as much as some other districts locally. I've been an outspoken critic of partisan interference as well as PAC money, dark money, coming into our local elections. I don't think most people want to see that in their local races because it brings that hyper-partisan tone to what we do. Look, we're out here responding to constituent services, right? Trying to secure a building variance, or fix our roads, or make sure that your garbage is picked up in a timely manner. I don't think most people think of that as a partisan type of activity, and so I think what you're seeing with this partisan influence is a lot being driven probably by fall elections that are coming up. Obviously, we're going to have a contested U.S. Senate race, and I think both parties recognize that and are trying to maybe leverage the outcome of local elections to steer a better result for some of these higher partisan offices. But I don't think it belongs in local races. I support nonpartisan races. I obviously was the target of a state party had run some ads. The local party gave me 2 red flags for something that quite frankly was a lie, and it had since been covered by local media as such. So I think, to me, it just demonstrates that parties don't think highly of our ability to critically think for ourselves, and I think what goes on at the local level, these are very critical discussions, very nuanced discussions around issues that impact our daily lives, and not necessarily what's going on at the state or federal level. And so I certainly would support a pledge, to kind of keep that level of interference out of our local elections.
Well, just to echo what Brian said, let me briefly touch on the voter guide that was put up, connecting the dots on those two red flags. I was certainly asked a number of questions and by the press, and so here's kind of my take is that if there is evidence there about a national issue interfering in Brian's judgment, then I haven't seen it. And that's certainly not an endorsement of Brian, but I haven't seen that evidence, and I think that Brian is certainly locally focused, as he should be, and as all this really should be. There are a lot of national and state levels of issues that impact the municipal and local level, and you can't not be cognizant of those things, and you have to take those things into consideration. Like I mentioned earlier, the global climate crisis is going to come to Green Bay. It's going to come in, and that's something that we have to be ready for, and something that we have to continue to manufacture resilience against, and we have to embed that into our community and into our infrastructure, and make sure that we're preparing as an international city, hopefully one day, that we're prepared in that way, just like other large cities are. But does the national and the state politics have a lot to do with what we're doing down here? Probably not. We're on the ground, we're talking to neighbors. There is certainly a lot of circus and carnival and light show available for everyone on TV at night. But I love the idea that we can keep it civil and we can talk amongst neighbors and members of our community here at the local level. Maybe a number of the folks who you see on these debates are public figures in your eyes, but Brian and I are really just neighbors who live in your neighborhood. And maybe we like at certain times the idea of being local celebrities or being celebritized, but really what we're trying to do is just help the community. So we're neighborhood people just like everyone else. Does it have a place in the local politics? Probably not. We're trying to serve our community and our neighbors, and so that would be my take on that.
You see it in every campaign cycle. Sort of the quintessential partisan talking point is, I'm going to, march against Madison politics and Washington politics. And I think people have demonstrated over and over again that's the level of political discord and civility that they don't like. They don't like it. And as a result, I am adamantly opposed to that level of interference at the local level. Just because, again, if everybody makes it a campaign issue every single election cycle, why on earth would we want that at the local level?
Well, I think that we're in agreement here on this item, as we are with almost all items. But there is certainly a lot of opportunity for you to be entertained and for ratings to go up and for coverage to be there. And I think a lot of people would love to make a lot of attention out of issues like this. I love the idea of a nonpartisan race. I would love if the mayorship was even a nonpartisan position, in all cases. I love the idea that we can be universally, connected to everyone in our community, and that people can find out more about their local neighbors and their positions instead of a blanket D or R that's just placed next to their name. And I think that we need a little bit more of that in our community.
Next question, and my final question for the District 9 candidates. Should the City of Green Bay continue to use TIF districts, tax incremental financing, to support economic development? What are other ways the city can incentivize economic development?
Well, I recently had a conversation. It was a pretty long conversation, but it was with Guy Zimmer. And, Guy Zimmer is a pretty infamous person in the community. He's been around for a long time and has certainly seen things come and go. And the TIF districts are something that I think that we really inherently disagree on. Guy seemed to, and maybe I shouldn't speak for him, but he seemed very opposed to TIF districts. I love the idea of TIF districts as a financial instrument. And tax increment funding, there is a lot of opportunity that exists in these areas that you wouldn't see otherwise. There's a lot of funding for projects and businesses and opportunities and resources that are available through this sort of funding mechanism that you just wouldn't see. When we want to revitalize an area, here's a way that we can leverage some dollars. Now, there are certainly some problems, and I think that a lot of people will agree that when you start funding things at the city level and you start borrowing against dollars there, with the scope of a long-term investment, that maybe doesn't dredge up tax base from a property that you'd like to see a lot sooner. There can be some disagreement there, but I love the idea that these districts can be there in order to facilitate a lot of new business, a lot of new development, and I would certainly support the TIF districts that exist now. Whether or not the creation of new ones is on the table, I don't know, but I certainly appreciate a lot of the effort that's gone into the ones that exist now, particularly in District 9. There are a number of TIF districts, and I'm involved with projects and neighbors like the Shipyard District, where we would love to borrow, and we would love to see some TIF dollars there that are implemented in order to better that neighborhood, and that's what these things are supposed to be used for. So I'm in support of keeping them.
Right?
It's an emphatic yes. TIF districts are one of the only economic development tools that exists in the state of Wisconsin. You go to other states and they have a buffet of tools that they can use. We have one, TIF. Otherwise, the only way we have the ability to generate any type of economic development incentive is through property tax levies. And I don't think anybody's in support of that. So I think the issue at play here is that most individuals that I interact with fundamentally don't understand what a TIF district is and how it functions. And essentially it's a tax rebate, right? So if you don't create new value, if you don't create new taxable value, there's no incentive, right? I mean, no value, no incentive. And what it does is it allows you to close the financing gap that prevents projects from happening. So if you don't have a TIF incentive on these large-scale developments, these projects will never happen, plain and simple. And quite frankly, until the state of Wisconsin were to step in and modify how these operate, they'll just go somewhere else. Schwab and I will give it, Bellevue will give it, everybody else around it will give it, and Green Bay will implode on itself if we don't properly leverage these things. Now, where you have to be careful is upfront TIF incentive. I've never supported an upfront TIF product because it's never come to us, but that's when you give a bulk amount of money up front. Most of these are what we call pay-go, meaning the property owner has to pay their taxes first, and then they're given a rebate. So there's zero risk to the city. But most notably, it's how these TIDs, tax incremental district, is leveraged. And oftentimes we borrow against the TID based on future development, and that's what allows us to do projects like the shipyard. It's what allows us to put in streets and sewer and water mains. And most folks think that our general property tax levy is what pays for those things. When you're expanding into new industrial parks and new neighborhoods, a lot of times, it's borrowing against the TID that allows us to do that. So I wholeheartedly support the use of them. It is a very smart financial tool that we have available to us, and again, one of the only ones available to us.
Any rebuttal?
Yeah, I heard Brian just mentioned that there aren't a lot of other tools that are available, and just in rebuttal that I think that there is an opportunity right now in the South Broadway area. A lot of businesses are very eager to tax themselves, so I don't think it's always the case, and I don't think he was implying that it is. But there are a lot of businesses who want to see the opportunities and the resources and the kind of organization and dollars that come to a nonprofit in order to revitalize the South Broadway. And I think a lot of them are very eager to tax themselves with a special assessment. So I think there are some tools that we certainly want to continue to look at implementing, and I think we'll be very excited to look at those down in the Shipyard District sometime very soon.
Right?
I would just reiterate, no value, no TIF. That's how it works, right? So if you don't create a property with high accessible value, there's no incentive available. A lot of times I talk to folks, you look at villages like Ashwaubenon nearby, they have beautiful roads, right? Why? Because they properly leveraged TIF products 20 years ago that are now coming online and paying full freight right now. And they have a higher tax collection because of it. Incent the development now, and then long term you're going to generate the value that supports you in your city.
Last question. Please explain your understanding of how road construction and maintenance are paid for in Green Bay. Additionally, are you satisfied with the progress that is being made?
Me? Okay. Well, very simply, we bond. It's basically we borrow the money and that's what contributes to the city's debt. One of the things I've advocated for is I would love to see some of that over time start to come back into the city's annual levy, our annual budget. I think there's a transition that can occur there. Now that, especially times like now where the bond rate is so low, there is some advantages to actually borrowing for it. You know, and again, if you go back to, as I mentioned before, TIF is oftentimes used to expand in these areas. And by the way, our city right now, our TIF debt is more than 50% below what the state permits. So we have plenty of cap there with which to leverage and use in new underdeveloped areas. But ultimately, when you look at things like resurfacing right now, we're doing 40% more than the 10-year average. Rome wasn't built in a day. I mean, we're talking about a generation of disinvestment in our roads, and we are not going to get there overnight. But the wheel tax, of course, is another issue that's come into play. And we did authorize that. It generates about $1.5 to $1.6 million a year. One of the things that when I supported the wheel tax, I said that I would not support it if it did not come with a 5-year capital improvement plan. And that's what kind of lays out all of the city's bonding and capital requests for the next 5 years. And that allows us to more judiciously look at how we're investing our dollars. Because we can't continue to raise taxes, charge more fees, and let our debt grow. At some point, we're going, it's going to be the straw that broke the camel's back. And so we have to figure out, looking further into the future, how we are investing these dollars. The wheel tax right now, the one thing I did not support was that we took out of our regular budget about $300,000 a year that historically had been funded with blacktop and joint sealing, and I did not support the transition of that to the wheel tax, and I would absolutely support putting that back into our annual budget.
Well, had I been on the city council back in the day with the wheel tax, I think I probably would have supported it. Not because I love the idea of taxing folks for driving their cars or trying to get around town, but because I think that there is a pretty incessant need to repair roads. It's the issue that comes up most often with folks in the city, and it's an issue that I think isn't only raised with thoroughfares like Shawano Avenue, but certainly a lot of folks who don't have very large homes or who don't necessarily live in very affluent neighborhoods. Their roads seem to be, particularly in District 9 when I've been knocking doors, their roads seem to be kind of discriminately looked over. And a big part of my piece with running for council is that there are a lot of businesses and a lot of residents in the area who feel maybe a little overlooked. Now, the districts are very large. The city only has so many resources. But, I really am a champion for the underdog and people who want the same sort of equitable experience and standard of living as people in our community and now in the same district. I'm not trying to pit anyone against each other, and I would caution against that because, people are in the station in life that they're in, and we all have to make the best of that and try and improve. But there certainly are a lot of roads in District 9 that I think if there were nicer homes on those roads, those might have been looked at. Now, I would love the idea of continuing to bond in order to improve that number from 40% to 60 in the next number of years. I certainly don't have the financial background or wherewithal to say that that's possible right now, but I love the idea of improving the kind of improvements that we're making and continue on this sort of trend upward. It can't all be done in a day, that's true, just like Brian said. But let's continue forward, and I'd like to see the community, grow and prosper. No one wants these expenses on their vehicles. There are other options maybe that we can explore so that these roads aren't being necessarily dredged up and destroyed all the time and in need of repair. But let's continue to fund these things, and I would commit to doing that.
30 seconds.
Yeah, I do agree that parts of District 9 have been discriminately looked over for decades. That's no longer the case. In fact, District 9, the last 2 capital improvement plans that have come through the city consume the largest percentage of investment than any other district in the city of Green Bay. And that has come because we've eliminated some bad policies that previously existed, so that now we can start to make stronger investments in the areas of our city that need it most, and not necessarily based on who has the most valuable housing stock. So we are making great progress right now in District 9, and more investment than ever is now coming into it.
Tarl, 30 seconds.
Well, I love that the trend is changing, and I love that more dollars are coming into the downtown, where I would assume there is more traffic usually, but but there's always room for improvement. And it's certainly not an knock Brian or the administration of the city, but I would love to see more done for people with lower income areas. When I was knocking doors very recently, I've had a number of comments from folks that the neighborhood is a little spooky or it's a little bit scary, and that's not the fault of low income people. The roads are destroyed in a way that's disparate to other areas of the city. The street lights are not always as taken care of. If it's a spooky area or a scary area, it's not because there's more crime. It's because they aren't lit well enough, or it's because they don't have the same resources allocated to their streets or the surrounding business area. These folks deserve those resources, and I'd like to continue that trend that Brian talked about.
And now we have our 2-minute closing statements, and Brian, I believe you went first with the openings. No? Yeah, these will in fact be 2-minute closing statements. So.
How's first?
Brian, you did open first, did you not? You don't even remember? Go ahead.
I'll stay. I really enjoy the opportunity to have a little bit of a conversation here. I got a lot of busy people here in this room, and so for everyone to take a minute to just talk about some of the issues, the Llama as a platform on social media, to get the word out across the city. There's a lot of movers and shakers in this group and on the internet here who, I think will benefit from seeing that we all have a lot in common, and it's not as contentious as you might think. Brian and I think we have a lot more in common than not. I think we both want to see continued development and success in District 9 and across the city. I don't think anyone can argue with that. I enjoy working with Brian, and I certainly love to learn from him over the last number of years that he's been. Although I too would like the opportunity here to serve on the City Council. I would love to continue forward in District 9. Now that the boundaries have changed and I have the opportunity to live and own a business here, I certainly have a perspective that I think would benefit the City Council. I'm a younger guy, there are some new ideas. I don't want to scare you, but I think that having a fresh outlook on things is always important. And there right now are only 15% of the city that are 65 or older. There's a very large part of the voter base and the tax-paying people who are underrepresented right now on the council. As we move forward, I would love to be able to be a representative for people down here who don't necessarily always feel they have a voice. I'm a low-income person. My heart is here, and I really do stand with people down here who maybe don't, who don't welcome gentrification or would love to revitalize their neighborhood. There's a lot of big conversations that we should be having. I'd like to have those. I'd like to talk about houses and keep the ball rolling there. There are a lot of sensitive subjects that exist in our downtown. We have unique opportunities in order to be, a guiding light here for the communities that surround not only the downtown of District 9, but Green Bay and Brown County and the surrounding counties. I'd like to continue the trend of development and continued success. We have a lot of folks down here. Let's improve their standard of living. I'd love to have you vote on April 5th. And thanks so much for the opportunity to speak here.
Brian, you're closing.
Yeah, thank you as well, Ron and Jerry, for your thoughtful questions, and as well as the Llama for coordinating these. And I think this is going to be a wonderful platform moving into the future. I'd like to thank Tommy and Jill with Gather on Broadway for hosting, Kavarna for sponsoring this caffeine addiction to get us through this, and of course, and most importantly, my opponent, Tarl Knight. I think he's talked about it. He's absolutely right. We've had a very respectful dialogue here and throughout the campaign, and I don't know that that's been the case in every district. And I sincerely appreciate that, because it allows us to focus our attention on what matters most, and that's ideas. And I think we both have ideas, and some of them similar and some of them different. But I love that at the end of the day, we can just share those ideas and let the voters decide, which is what their responsibility is. There's a famous quote from the former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, that I often use: all politics is local. And this is really what it's about. And it's getting down and meeting with the residents in your district and understanding their needs and how do we affect their daily lives. I'm oftentimes told that sometimes people may not necessarily disagree with me, but they appreciate my thoughtful and studied approach to issues, and they can understand why I might go a certain way. But oftentimes I'm also told that I make policy better. And I think that's ultimately what we're looking for, is policy that is stronger, that is better, that is more representative of the diverse community that we have. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to serve in this role. It is an honor and a privilege, and it is not something that I'm entitled to, and I recognize and appreciate that. And as a result, I work hard to earn people's trust so that we can continue to do that. And so on April 5th, of course, I would appreciate the community's continued support to serve in this role, and I would also just point out that regardless of what happens, I know Tarl and I are going to continue to work together. In fact, we've been doing so, the formation of the Shipyard District and some other things, and so look forward to that continued process as well.
Thanks for tuning in and attending the District 9 debate forum with Tarl Knight and Brian Johnson, and we will be wrapping up. Next, we have Mark Sawyer coming by himself. I don't believe his opponent is going to be here. So Mark Sawyer will be coming at what time? 2-minute break. 2-minute break. We'll be right back. Thank you.